Alan was a shut-in virgin demon lord who goons to capybara picks alone in the forest. However, after he rescued a princess who was framed by her country, he made her his personal maid and practiced his 50 Shades moves on her every night. It all began one night when a girl named Charlotte tried to flee from guards chasing her. While she was hiding, one of the guards mentioned that they were about to enter the ruthless demon lord's territory. Just then, another guard came with news that Charlotte had been spotted elsewhere, so they all followed him. Once they were out of sight, Charlotte came out of hiding and rushed in the opposite direction, where she suddenly tripped and fell down a slope. The next day, Alan, the so-called demon lord, read a newspaper and learned about Charlotte's disappearance. While speculating what happened, he sensed a presence in the forest and decided to play Sherlock. To his surprise, he found the unconscious Charlotte, surrounded by some forest animals. As he picked her up, he immediately sensed a guard nearby, so he teleported behind the guy, who then tried to slash him, only to discover he was attacking an illusion. Alan observed his armor and deduced he was a personal guard for the royal family of Nerus, so he asked why he was here. In response, the guard called his camping squad out of hiding and then demanded that Alan hand over Charlotte, stating that she was a wanted criminal from their country. Alan refused, and when they tried to attack him, he used an ice spell to easily take all but the leader down, making the guard recognize him as the demon lord. With a smug look, Alan unleashed a factory reset spell that altered their minds and made them believe that Charlotte had gotten away. After they walked away like mindless zombies, Alan took Charlotte to his place and tended to her. Later, the sleeping beauty woke up, so he offered her some tea and asked how she ended up passed out in the forest. After she narrated her tale, Alan began reading what the newspaper said about her to see her reaction. Being labeled as a criminal, Charlotte swore the story was a lie, and Alan believed her because he could tell when someone was lying from their eyes. Charlotte became overwhelmed because he was the first to believe she was innocent, and explained how her fiancé, Prince Cecil, suddenly accused her of treason and ordered her to be thrown in prison. Alan concluded that Charlotte had been framed and wondered if the prince had done it because he found a real cowgirl. Charlotte then thanked him for helping her and decided to leave because she did not want to burden him. However, Alan pretended not to hear what she said and asked if she was any good at cleaning. Charlotte said she could use his scrub daddy like everyone else, so he excitedly told her he was hiring her as a live-in maid. When Charlotte reminded him that she was a fugitive who would cause him trouble, he told her he was betrayed and left for dead by his adventuring party, hoping that she would see that they had something in common. Charlotte easily believed this lie, but still refused to live with him, so Alan cursed himself to die if she didn't stay with him, forcing her to agree to become his maid. The next day, after Charlotte cleaned the house, Alan was shocked that a noble could do chores, but he quickly realized it was because she'd been treated like a servant. He told her she was free to do as she pleased until dinner time and left to get some alone gooning time in his office. Hours later, when he stood up to leave the study, he was shocked to find Charlotte on her knees, counting the grains on the wooden floor. Worried the girl might be losing it, he led her to the living room and asked if she had any hobbies. Charlotte told him that she did, but when she listed all the ways you can clean a house, Alan realized that the girl's idea of fun was being Cinderella. After learning that she was mistreated and never got to live out her rebellious phase, he decided he would teach her how to be naughty so she could experience life properly. That night, he returned home with a variety of cakes, sweets, and every kind of junk food she could think of, and told her it was their dinner. Charlotte argued that it wasn't balanced and refused to eat it. However, Alan threatened to put another death curse on himself, so she agreed to eat. After taking a bite of the cake, Charlotte broke down into tears and admitted it was her first time someone had done something like that for her. Alan told her it was only the beginning of what he would do for her, and he encouraged her to eat more. But Charlotte insisted he join her, so he did, even though he disliked sweets. After dinner, Alan returned to his study and spent the entire night working on what he called the naughty list. However, when he woke up in the morning and went through what he'd written, he realized it was filled with things only an idiot like him would enjoy, so he tossed the book in the trash. On his way out of the study, he ran into Charlotte in the hallway, and she expressed surprise at seeing him up early. Alan admitted that he'd fallen asleep in his study, causing Charlotte to ask whether it was because he'd been working. Since he didn't want her to know about his list, he went along with the work excuse and told her he was going to bed. However, instead of leaving, he asked what she was up to, and Charlotte told him she was on her way to sweep the house entrance. He then told her that she didn't have to work so hard, but Charlotte insisted that it was the only way to repay him for the kindness he'd shown her. Moved by her thoughtfulness, he tried once more to convince her to take things slow, but Charlotte revealed that cleaning was part of her daily routine. This pissed him off, as he couldn't comprehend why her family would treat her worse than a servant. Upon seeing his angry mug, Charlotte grew scared and rushed off, leaving Alan to wonder whether the girl was Mother Teresa in disguise, since she never spoke ill of those who hurt her. He knew that if he were in her shoes, he'd have made all of them pay in the most horrible way possible. Just as he began thinking about how much Charlotte's past affected her, he heard a familiar voice from outside through the open window. Immediately, he rushed outside to see Charlotte standing beside a cat girl, who introduced herself as Miacha. She worked for a delivery company and had come to drop off Alan's mail as usual. While she was yapping away to Charlotte, she referred to Alan as the Demon Lord, which surprised Charlotte. So Alan immediately clarified that it was a stupid nickname given to him by the townspeople. Just then, Miacha recognized Charlotte as the fugitive the royal family was searching for, causing Charlotte to drop her broom in fear. Alan then tried to explain, but Miacha cut him off, saying he had nothing to worry about because she was no snitch. A little while later, after Miacha handed over Alan's mail, he asked her to deliver some potions to town for him. Miacha was happy to take on the job, but said it was time he moved to town and started selling the potions himself since they were hot items. Alan immediately brushed this suggestion aside, as he was a professional shut-in who disliked human interactions as much as vampires hated the sun. Miacha told him to loosen up a bit, but Alan gave her a cold stare that frightened her, so she pointed out that the stare was the very reason people called him a demon lord. Alan knew she was telling the truth because even the young ones in the village often came looking for him as a test of courage, only to run away screaming when he showed his face. Tired of talking about his lonely lifestyle as a try-hard professor, Snape, Alan asked Miacha about the other things which her company delivered. The cat girl immediately pulled out some catalogs, which Alan took and handed to Charlotte, telling her to make a list of whatever she needed from them. Charlotte happily browsed the catalogs, and after placing her order with Miacha, she promised Alan she would pay him back. Alan told her that she didn't have to do that and threatened to buy everything in the catalogs if she didn't drop the idea. Hearing this, Miacha laughed and said that Alan was acting like an overbearing sugar daddy. She then advised Charlotte to tell him off whenever he got like that, but Charlotte said she couldn't since he was her benefactor. This made Miacha call her a wimp, and as she began throwing punches at Alan like a low-budget Mike Tyson, Alan suddenly got an idea. A few days later, Miacha returned with their orders. While Charlotte's package was small, Alan's arrived in a large crate. When he unboxed it, it turned out to be a punching bag he'd gotten for Charlotte. Confused, Charlotte asked why he thought she needed one, and Alan told her it was the naughty thing of the day. Hearing this, Miacha assumed the pair was into some kind of freaky role play and started snickering. Realizing what she was thinking, Alan screamed at her to get her mind out of the gutter, and then attached a photo of Cecil to the punching bag. Next, he put a boxing glove on Charlotte's hand and asked her to punch the image, but Charlotte refused. Alan thought she was hesitant out of fear, so he tried to coax her into it, saying it was good to release pent-up anger that way. To his surprise, Charlotte admitted that she wasn't angry at Cecil and even defended his actions, saying he probably had a good reason. Alan tried to make her see that Cecil deserved to be cancelled, but Charlotte disagreed. She even went so far as to say she was grateful to her family for raising her, and that the prince deserved someone better than her. As Alan listened to her, he realized that Charlotte had learned to suppress her feelings and would forever blame herself for the wrongs others had done to her. Miacha suggested he leave Charlotte alone for the time being, but Alan refused to listen and asked Charlotte to punch him rather than the bag. Of course, Charlotte refused, but Alan was a stubborn guy, so he used magic to force her to punch him. When this happened, Charlotte freaked out and tried to take off the glove, but Alan told her to relax. He also promised that he wouldn't leave her, no matter how she treated him, and declared that she was now a free woman. Shocked, Charlotte told him he could have said all that without making her punch him, but Alan said a little drama never hurt anyone. After he healed himself, Charlotte warned him never to pull such a stunt again and promised she would start living freely, though it would take some time to get used to it. Alan felt proud of her after hearing this, and as he stared at her, Miacha became convinced that she witnessed the birth of the love story of the year. She told Alan to keep using her services, as she was sure they would soon need a double bed, a ring, and a baby stroller, but the pair were too dumb to catch on. Miacha didn't mind, though, and began making a list so she wouldn't forget. Meanwhile, an unknown girl stood in a tree, watching the house. The following day, while Alan and Charlotte were drinking tea and having a chat, the mystery girl burst in through the window. Alan wasn't surprised by her, but he asked how she had found him, since he was sure he covered his tracks. The girl named Aruka explained that she'd narrowed her search by identifying pollen on his letters. Afterwards, she arrived in that region and questioned the locals until they pointed her to the right place. It turned out that she was Alan's stepsister, as her parents had adopted him at a young age. When he failed to introduce Charlotte to her, Aruka asked whether she was his flavor of the month, and they both denied it. Alan even went as far as saying that a fool like him wasn't worthy of holding Charlotte's hand to talk more of warming her bed. Aruka found this very sus, so she demanded answers, which Alan saw no problem providing. After learning the truth about Charlotte and the arrangement between her and Alan, Aruka called her brother an idiot. She also expressed her disappointment that he has been teaching her dumb things, Charlotte was surprised that Eruka didn't turn on her after learning her true identity, so Eruka explained that it was because Alan had certified her as a good person. Turning to her brother, she told him she was there to drag him back home. However, her aim had changed after meeting Charlotte. When she said she would take over Charlotte's naughty training, Alan objected, leaving Charlotte tugged between the siblings. In the end, they agreed to have a competition to see who could teach Charlotte to be naughtier. Later, Charlotte and the siblings went into town, and Alan used his magic to turn her blonde hair black. While Eruka was styling it, he told the girls that he'd change the color back once they got home. Eruka told him that he didn't have to, but Alan said he did because the blonde hair looked good on Charlotte. His indirect compliment made Charlotte blush, but since Eruka wasn't about to let him riz his way to victory, she pulled Charlotte away. Their first stop was a clothing store, and while the girls looked right at home, Alan felt out of place. He considered leaving, but changed his mind, for it would make it look as if he were forfeiting the competition. So to distract himself, he thought about how Eruka had been challenging him since he was adopted. Not surprisingly, she always lost, but that never stopped her from challenging him over and over again. He was soon pulled back to the present when Eruka called his attention to Charlotte's dress. Caught off guard, Alan barely managed to compliment her, but also pointed out that her outfit was too short. When he caught himself ogling her exposed legs, he hit his chest with a spell-induced punch. This made him cough up blood, and when Charlotte complained, he assured her he was fine. Eruka pushed Charlotte back into the dressing room, then returned to ask Alan what he wanted her to do. Alan asked her to tell him the current state of the Nero's kingdom regarding Charlotte, and she promised to look into it. When she mentioned looking into Cecil as well, Alan told her to hold off, since it wasn't yet time to punish him. Intrigued, she pointed out that it was the first time he had been interested in someone other than himself. Before he could ask what she meant, Charlotte called Eruka to help her fasten her clasp. Eruka happily went in, but the moment she saw Charlotte's back, her expression changed. Nevertheless, she fastened the clasp, and when they stepped out of the dressing room, Alan complained that the outfit was too revealing. Eruka asked who died and made him the head of the fashion police, and said that a girl's best weapon was her outfit. She then turned Charlotte around under the guise of showing off the outfit, but what she really wanted was for Alan to see her back. It was riddled with scars from years of abuse, but the siblings decided not to ask her about it. Alan also secretly used his magic to heal the scars, and he became even more pissed because he knew they hadn't tried to heal her before. Driven by his anger, he ordered Eruka to terminate Cecil and Charlotte's family thoroughly. Since he didn't name names, Charlotte asked what they were terminating, and Alan told her, bugs. Eruka then asked Alan to pick an outfit for Charlotte, so he nervously picked one at random. To his surprise, the dress turned out to be as modest as your favorite pole dancer's best outfit, so he became embarrassed and got teased by Eruka. After they left the clothing store, Eruka asked Alan what his plan was, and he revealed that he was going to teach Charlotte to splurge. However, every item he suggested she buy was either ugly or useless, so Eruka took over. In the end, the siblings bought Charlotte so many things that the girl couldn't help but feel bad about how much money they had wasted on her. Alan assured her that all the money had been well spent, and when he complimented her on how good she looked in everything, she blushed again. As a clueless idiot, he couldn't understand why, so Eruka told him not to overwork his undeveloped brain and brought up the issue about his lack of taste. This led to another argument, but before things could escalate, Charlotte intervened, telling them not to fight. The siblings assured her it wasn't a fight, but when they saw how serious Charlotte was, they promised not to fight again. Later, as the trio walked home, Eruka spotted a guy in a magical wheelchair, and, as she gushed over it, Alan slipped away with Charlotte to a jewelry stall. There, he noticed a hairpin the same color as her eyes and paid more than twice what it was worth. After he fixed it in Charlotte's hair, she declared it her new favorite item, and Alan felt his cold heart skip a beat. Unfortunately, the moment was ruined when two thugs bumped into Charlotte and tried to start up trouble. Alan was ready to go band for band with them, but stopped when he remembered he'd promised Charlotte that he wouldn't fight. So he apologized, but one of them demanded that he let them clap Charlotte all night long as compensation. As soon as he said this, angry Alan returned, and he broke the guy's finger without a second thought. His friend tried to avenge him by pulling out his magic sword, but Alan easily knocked him down and threatened to send them to their maker if they looked at Charlotte again. The crowd that had gathered began to praise Alan, but the sorcerer ignored them and apologized to Charlotte for the fight. Charlotte told him not to worry as she understood that he'd done it to protect her. Alan was relieved to hear this, as he'd been afraid that she would despise him and leave. He then smiled, and as they shared a moment, Eruka, who was standing in the crowd, admitted defeat since she knew she couldn't compete with love. Just then, a giant shadow fell behind Alan and Charlotte, and its owner demanded to know whether Alan was the one who had done in his boys. Surprisingly, Alan recognized the low-budget Robocop as Majeth, someone from his past, so he began patting his head excitedly, saying it had been ages since he'd last seen him. This only made Megath angrier, and when he tried to punch Alan, the latter realized that Megath hadn't recognized him yet, so he introduced himself. Almost immediately, Megath fell to his knees and started apologizing to Alan, prompting his men to question his sanity. In response, Megath popped off at them for provoking Alan. Charlotte was also confused by Megath's sudden change, so Erica, who had moved closer during the commotion, explained why. She said their father was the chair of the country's largest magic academy, and that Alan had graduated from it at a very young age. After graduation, he became a teacher at the academy and earned the nickname, the Great Demon Lord. Alan then asked Megath to lift his head, assuring him that he had done him no wrong. However, he said his boys had tried to hurt Charlotte, and he couldn't forgive them for it. Curious, Megath asked who Charlotte was to Alan, and the guy couldn't respond. He wasn't sure whether to call her his housemate, his second sister, or a potential love interest, so he said she was precious to him. Weeks later, when Eruka and Mayacha showed up at Alan's house, they found him sulking on the porch steps, so they asked who had died. When he didn't respond, Eruka deduced that something had happened between him and Charlotte, and he was shocked by how spot-on she was. However, to prevent them from jumping to dirty conclusions, Alan explained what happened. He said that after he'd given Charlotte her wages the previous night, the girl had asked him to let her go into town alone, and he'd agreed because he was a simp who couldn't say no. Hearing this, Eruka told her brother that he was a fool, and Alan dramatically accepted his new title. As he fell back into worrying about Charlotte, Eruka told him he was wasting time and energy when an easy solution existed. A little while later, the trio arrived in town so they could tail her from a distance. When Alan saw her using the map he'd given her, he had a proud dad moment. But Eruka interrupted him. She asked what Charlotte's reason for coming into town was, and Alan said she'd refused to divulge that information to him when he asked. Just then, they noticed that Charlotte looked lost, and Miacha said that if she kept walking, she would end up in an unsafe district. The district was under the control of a ragtag adventurer party called Serpent Fang, and their leader, Gro, was a known Viper charmer. This new info left the siblings worried, but Alan said he didn't want to interfere with Charlotte's first solo adventure. Suddenly, he said he had somewhere to be and left the girls to watch over Charlotte. Shortly after, the girls watched Charlotte walk into the Serpent Fang's territory and became extremely worried when the party members surrounded her. However, when they tried to help her, the members surprised them by greeting and welcoming Charlotte. As the girls tried to figure out what was happening, Alan suddenly appeared out of nowhere, revealed that he had arrived ahead of them, and put the fear of God and Gro in his guise. At that moment, Charlotte noticed how beat up the guys looked and offered them the healing potion she had. This act of kindness moved Gro and the others so much that they burst into tears and swore to turn over a new leaf. When they finished being dramatic, Gro curiously asked Charlotte about her connection to Alan. The question made Charlotte assume they were his acquaintances, and one of the guys almost let it slip that Alan had beaten them into submission. Gro quickly cautioned him to shut his pipe before Alan returned to renew their contract, unaware that Alan was preparing a Rasengan just for that. Fortunately, he never got to use it because he was distracted by Charlotte, who began talking about their relationship. She told the guys that Alan had taken her in and given her a job when she had nowhere else to go. So, to her, he was, more or less, her master. This description didn't sit right with them, as they were sure Alan had tricked her into servitude. When Gro voiced what they were all thinking, Alan got pissed but agreed that, given his reputation, it made sense they would think that way. Charlotte refused to let them think that way and told them that Alan was a perfect gentleman. She assured them he was misunderstood, and it made them rethink their opinions of him. However, everything changed when she said Alan had been teaching her all kinds of naughty things, shocking them. They were all convinced that she wasn't referring to things that would get you on Santa's naughty list, and Charlotte only made things worse by saying that she and Alan had stayed up all night doing naughty things. Erica and Miacha were also disappointed in Alan when they heard this, so he clarified that they had only been playing video games and eating junk food. Eventually, Charlotte continued on her way, but Miacha warned the siblings that she would still encounter more dangerous individuals. Alan then declared that to ensure her safety, he would take control of the entire district, and that's what he did. Afterwards, Miacha volunteered to continue watching over Charlotte while the siblings stayed behind, and Alan hesitantly agreed. A few hours later, Miacha returned to the siblings and said that Charlotte had finished shopping and would arrive soon with an acquaintance she had run into. Since he was nosy, Alan whispered in Miacha's ear, asking if she'd seen what Charlotte bought. Miacha admitted that she hadn't looked because she felt she was invading Charlotte's privacy. Just then, Charlotte came running towards them, with the jewelry stall owner trailing behind her. She excitedly told Alan that everyone had been singing his praises wherever she went. It turned out that by setting all the thugs straight, he had unintentionally made the streets safer for everyone. Alan admitted that he'd done it for Charlotte, but the stall owner still thanked him on behalf of everyone. She told Charlotte she was lucky to have a boyfriend like Alan, but Alan clarified they weren't dating. Despite this, the woman didn't retract what she'd said, and after she left, Alan shyly asked Charlotte how her shopping had gone. Charlotte excitedly told him it had gone well and then pulled out the gifts she'd bought for Aruka and Miacha. As the girls happily accepted their gifts, Alan couldn't help but feel jealous, so he asked Charlotte if she'd gotten him anything. Charlotte admitted that she got him nothing because she didn't know what he'd like, and Alan lashed out, saying he would have accepted anything since it came from her. Realizing her mistake, Charlotte apologized and then offered to mend his clothes while they chatted about the things he liked. This lifted Alan's spirit instantly, and he felt a warm sensation growing in his chest as he imagined them spending time together. Later that week, Charlotte joined Alan in the living room and began talking to him about the book he'd given her. The book contained a lot of information about the country, and Charlotte was happy she'd read it. While she was showing him a page, Alan asked whether there were any places in the book she wanted to visit. Charlotte hesitated to answer, knowing Alan would like to take her there once she did. Alan didn't see any problem with it, but Charlotte told her it would be too much since she already owed him so much. Additionally, she said she was fine just spending time at home and learning naughty things from him as long as it wasn't every day. Alan knew she was being honest, but he also wanted her to let loose and enjoy life, so he tried to convince her to tell him where she wanted to go. Charlotte still refused to tell him, so he threatened to put another death curse on himself, shocking the poor girl. Just as she began pleading with him not to, Miacha barged in like she owned the place, so Alan demanded to know why she was in his house so late at night. Miacha responded by pulling out an envelope and explaining that it was a trip to the You-Know-How region. The following day, the pair set off on the journey, and during the ride, a fascinated Charlotte told Alan that the Neru's kingdom had more mountains, so she had never truly touched grass. As the trip continued, Charlotte asked why he had invited her instead of Aruka to come with him, and he said Aruka was out of town running errands, which was what she told him, even though the truth was that she and Miacha were secretly following their carriage. The girls had planned the whole trip with the money the townspeople gave them, wanting to play Cupid. As if sensing their intentions, Alan suddenly felt a chill, but since he wasn't sure why, he brushed it aside. Soon, the inn they were heading to came into view, and Charlotte told Alan that she'd seen it in her book. When she showed it to him, Alan asked if it was the inn she'd wanted to visit earlier, and she said yes, but Alan called it a cap. He then began flipping through the book to see if he could guess where she truly wanted to go. Feeling embarrassed, Charlotte snatched the book away from him, as she shyly admitted that the place she wanted to visit was somewhere only underdeveloped humans would enjoy. Alan still couldn't guess it, so he promised not to tease her when she eventually told him where she wanted to go. A little while later, they arrived at the inn and were welcomed by one of Ariel's sisters. After she took their tickets, she offered to escort them to their room, but Alan asked about the hot spring instead. She told him they could use it anytime, so he suggested to Charlotte that they go there first, and she agreed. Hearing this, the woman offered to lead the way, but then turned and said she was honored that they were spending their honeymoon at her inn. Alan and Charlotte immediately jumped apart in shock, and Alan clarified that they weren't a couple. The woman was confused because their tickets were part of a special couples package, and that was when Alan realized Miacha had tricked them. Their guide told Alan they could switch to a different package anytime, but convinced him to stick with the couples package because it was the best. When they arrived at the bathhouse, the guide revealed it was mixed, shocking them. She then bundled Charlotte away to get a rental swimsuit, since she didn't bring any. While waiting for her to return, Alan tried to give himself a talk on morality since he was about to see Charlotte in a swimsuit. He even decided that he'd stop his heart with magic if seeing her would make his pumping machine malfunction. However, when Charlotte showed up looking like she belonged on a pedestal, his heart stopped beating on its own. His failure to compliment her made Charlotte think she looked bad. When Alan recovered, he allowed himself to stare at her Christmas ornaments before assuring her that she looked like a snack. Feeling shy, Charlotte also complimented him, so he pulled her along, saying they were going to enjoy a naughty day, which they did. To round everything off, they sat in the outdoor bath, watching the sunset, with their shippers not far behind. The two hoped they would finally get to see some action, but all Alan and Charlotte did was chill and talk. However, they were soon interrupted by their guide, who brought Charlotte some ice cream at Alan's request. Alan claimed that eating ice cream in the hot spring was a naughty activity, then used magic to keep it from melting. As Charlotte enjoyed her ice cream, other patrons began ordering some, too, and even asked Alan to use his magic to keep it from melting. Feeling generous, Alan agreed to their request, and later, while he was having dinner with Charlotte, the guide thanked him for helping boost their sales. She also told him the inn would make their sightseeing trip memorable and further show their appreciation, so Alan asked her to recommend places for them to visit. The woman listed a few places, but the one that caught Alan's attention was the spot where they could observe Fenrirs. He told Charlotte that they were peaceful, magical creatures which brought good luck to those who saw them. Unfortunately, it was breeding season, so the guide told them they might not see the creature if they went, and suggested that they visit the magical zoo instead. Charlotte became excited but quickly tried to hide it from Alan. Later, they were taken to their room, and when they saw that it was decorated for lovers, they panicked. Meanwhile, Aruka and Mayacha were in the other room, their ears glued to the wall as they tried to listen in on Alan and Charlotte. Back in Alan and Charlotte's room, they decided to go to bed after learning from the guide that the bed was a dream bed, allowing them to have any dream they wanted. However, they struggled to sleep, so Alan asked Charlotte what she wanted to dream about, and she told him she wanted to see her late mother. Alan then cast a spell to help her fall asleep faster, and knocked himself out with a more potent spell, which also affected Mayacha and Aruka. When he woke up in the morning, he found Charlotte already awake, her eyes teary. She told him that she'd seen her mother in her dreams and had a nice chat with her about everything, including Alan, and he said he was happy for her. Later in the day, they visited the magical zoo, and Alan told Charlotte that he'd realized that was where she wanted to go all along. He then asked what she wanted to do first, and she nervously pointed to the petting zoo, saying it had been her wish to go there since she was little. Alan agreed to go there, but first, he manipulated her into buying something. She chose cat ear accessories, and she got one for him, too, which he only agreed to wear because he couldn't say no to her. When they arrived at the petting zoo, Charlotte started crying, overwhelmed by the animal's fluffiness and cuteness. Alan didn't know how to respond to her hysterics. However, he made a mental note not to let her watch Zootopia. Charlotte wiped her eyes, thanked him for allowing her to express something so beautiful, and went inside. Hoping to give her an unforgettable experience, Alan spoke to the rabbits in their language and offered to buy them food if they would play with her. After they agreed, he turned to call Charlotte over, only to find her already surrounded by the animals. The rabbits also ran to meet her, and everyone who witnessed the scene wondered if she was Snow White in disguise. A little while later, as she sat talking with Alan on a bench, the animals gathered to watch her, but threatened to hurt Alan if he hurt her. Alan was surprised by their devotion and thought back to the day he had found her in the forest, surrounded by animals. Suddenly, he stood up and began lecturing Charlotte on the different types of magic and special skills in the world. When he finished, he told her he believed she was a beast tamer because animals always flocked to her. Just then, a zoo staff member rushed over to them and pleaded with Alan to help with an issue. A few minutes later, they arrived at a building where other staff members were gathered. When the zoo's director recognized Alan, he led them to the back room, where an injured, angry Fenrir was caged. The older man explained that it had been separated from its family and had been shot by a poacher. They had brought it in because of its injuries, but the creature had refused to let anyone near it, and none of them could speak to it. Alan tried to talk to the creature, but it snapped at him, making it very clear it wasn't interested in communicating. As he and the director tried to decide what to do, the staff who had brought them there rushed in and said Fenrir's mother was on her way. This caused widespread panic among the other staff members, as everyone knew that Fenrirs were very strong, particularly the one coming, as it was over 100 years old. Alan knew they couldn't return the cub to her in its current state, so he decided he would hold her off until the zoo was cleared. Charlotte then told Alan that she wanted to test out her beast-taming powers on the cub. Alan immediately refused, saying it was dangerous, but Charlotte pleaded with him to let her be more than another synonym for Sakura. The staff who brought them also pitched in, saying she was sure Charlotte could handle it because she'd seen her with the animals at the petting zoo. Alan considered it for a while, and seeing how she wanted to help others, he told Charlotte to give it her all. In the meantime, announcements were made all over the resort, urging everyone to evacuate, as a Fenrir was headed towards them. Aruka complained after hearing the announcement, but Miyacha reminded her that they had Alan on their side and had nothing to worry about. Just then, Alan appeared behind them and said he had a job for them. Afterwards, he went to the mountain pass the Fenrirs were using and, from there, erected a barrier around the resort. He then used an ice spell to trap the Fenrirs, but their mother emerged from the ground and tried to attack him. Alan managed to dodge the attack, but when she kept coming for him, he decided to go on the offensive. Right before he unleashed his spell, a capybara suddenly appeared behind him and told him not to. He said his name was Gosatsu and that he had come to rescue Charlotte from Alan's evil clutches. Confused, Alan asked how he knew Charlotte, and Gosatsu revealed that he'd met her in the forest after he escaped from the magical zoo. However, before he could help her, Alan came and took her away, so he'd been secretly watching over her since then. When he said he would get rid of Alan to protect Charlotte, Alan told him that he sounded like a jealous ex. Annoyed, Gosatsu hurled a fireball at him, and as they fought, he trash-talked Alan. He also said he would destroy the Neru's kingdom because of what they did to Charlotte. Suddenly, he freed the Fenrirs and revealed to Alan that he'd told them he was the one who kidnapped the cub. As they surrounded him, Alan wasn't confident he could take them on at the same time. Fortunately, he didn't have to because Charlotte arrived with other magical creatures, including the Fenrir cub, which she'd managed to tame. Alan was happy to see her, but questioned why she'd pulled up with a magical creature gang. Charlotte explained that the creatures had insisted on accompanying her, and she couldn't refuse them. Alan was shocked to learn that Charlotte could speak to them, even though she just discovered her abilities, unlike him, who had taken half a year to learn their language. The cub then explained what happened to his mother, and the next moment, all the Fenrirers angrily turned to face Gosetsu for lying to them. Gosetsu didn't flinch and told Charlotte to come with him because Alan was a good-for-nothing brat who just wanted to clap her. Charlotte argued that Alan was a good person, and as she continued defending him, Gosetsu decided to take her away by force. However, Alan got in his way, and after he knocked him down with his magic, Gosetsu had a change of heart and told Alan that he might not be bad after all. Later, when Alan and Charlotte returned to the resort, their guide thanked them for protecting everyone, but Alan said it was all Charlotte's doing. Embarrassed, Charlotte tried to invalidate her efforts, but Alan told her to be proud of herself, so she accepted the guide's thanks. Just as they were about to head home, the Fenrir pack suddenly appeared. Eruka and Mayacha also came, bringing the poachers with them, since Alan had charged them with capturing them. Alan then tried to speak to the poachers, but they showed no signs of remorse, so he used his magic to raise their defenses and told the Fenrirers to play with them. A little while later, it was time to leave, and Charlotte told Alan that one of the cubs wanted to come with them. When Alan asked whether the mother was okay with the decision, their guide explained that the cub could always return to visit its family. Alan then agreed to let it come, saying they would all live together as a family, which made Charlotte so happy that her brain began to overheat. During the ride home, Alan complained about Gosetsu, who had tagged along because he had appointed himself as Charlotte's bodyguard. When he made this known, Charlotte asked who he was, and Gosetsu told her that he was a family member who loved her dearly. Alan immediately protested, saying he didn't remember adding Gosetsu to his family tree. Days later, Charlotte told Alan she was going for a walk with the Fenrir, whom she had named Lou. After they left, Alan sighed as he realized that he and Charlotte had hardly spent time together since Lou came to live with them. Just then, Gosetsu showed up and started rubbing this fact in Alan's face, so Alan reminded him that he was an unwanted guest. Gosetsu didn't care and told him that he knew he loved Charlotte. Panicked, Alan walked to the window and saw Charlotte playing with Lou in the yard. As he stood there, he said he was proud of Charlotte for finally having a set goal. He recalled that she talked to him about it on the night they returned from the resort and had asked him to teach her how to be a beast tamer. The determination in her eyes was what pushed him to agree, and as the days passed, Charlotte threw herself into her studies. Alan could only feel proud as he guided her, and with each lesson, Charlotte proved herself a good student. One afternoon, while training Lou, Charlotte surprised Alan and Gosetsu by commanding the magical creature to perform some tricks. When it finished, Alan praised Charlotte, but when the glazing became too much, Gosetsu cut him off, saying even simps were supposed to show restraint. Feeling insulted, Alan told Gosetsu to return to the zoo, but Gosetsu reminded him that he wasn't going anywhere. Charlotte then fed Lou a treat, so Alan walked up to them and tried to pet the creature, but she tried to bite his hand off. Charlotte immediately cautioned her for doing that and apologized to Alan on her behalf, but he told her not to sweat it. He said Fenrir's couldn't be tamed by just anyone, and it would be better for everyone if he kept his hands to himself. For the first time, Gosetsu agreed with him, then told Charlotte she had reached the level of having beast conversations. Charlotte remembered that it was the ability to replace the language of magical creatures with human language. Alan complimented her for her retentive memory, and after she thanked him, she suddenly asked how Gosetsu could communicate with them. Gosetsu revealed he'd taught himself to speak human language and suggested she try the beast conversation with Lou. Alan didn't think it could be done, but Charlotte pleaded with him to let her give it a shot, so he agreed. Charlotte then cast the spell to make Lou speak human language, but when she tried to talk to her, Lou didn't respond, so Alan tried to comfort Charlotte. The next moment, Lou asked Alan why he was touching her mother with his filthy hands. Charlotte was ecstatic to hear Lou speak the human language, and as they chatted happily, Lou still growled at Alan. Later on, Alan prepared a bath for Lou using his magic, and when Charlotte asked her to thank him, Lou did so with as little sincerity as she could muster. Alan didn't seem to mind and told her to jump in, only to see Gosetsu already floating in the water. He demanded that Lou come out, but the capybara told him to shut up and kept swimming as Lou jumped in. Gosetsu then suddenly transformed himself into a big melon baddie, shocking all of them. When they got over the shock, Charlotte and Lou began splashing around in the pool, so Alan took the moment to relax and observe them. He told himself that Charlotte had changed a lot from the woman she had been when they first met, and for reasons unknown to him, his heart began to race. However, he chalked it up to the fact that he's put one too many death curses on it. Charlotte soon joined him on the bench, and when she thanked him for everything, Alan claimed he was only keeping his promise to teach her to be naughty. As they chatted some more, the conversation shifted to his house, and Alan told her that he'd never met the previous owner. Apparently, it belonged to an eccentric elf who suddenly disappeared without a trace. People speculated that the elf had either unalived himself or met a tragic end at the hands of a monster they created. Alan soon noticed that Charlotte looked horrified, but eventually realized it was because Gosetsu was covered in red mushrooms. Worried, they rushed to check on him and found the mushrooms emerging from the water. Before they could figure out why, a white-haired girl named Dorothea suddenly appeared from the ground and asked them to return her mushrooms. Curious about her identity, they followed her to where she lived, which happened to be Alan's basement. A glance at the place and Alan deduced that she'd been living there for a while. The next moment, Charlotte grabbed his hand out of fear because she believed that Dorothea was a ghost. Dorothea assured her that she was real and asked who they were since she'd never seen them around before. Alan told her he owned the house, but Dorothea said he had to be tripping because the house belonged to her. Realizing what was going on, Alan asked if she was the elf who had gone missing 30 years ago, shocking Dorothea, who couldn't believe that she had lived in seclusion for that long. When they returned outside, Gosetsu, the know-it-all, pointed out that Dorothea was a dark elf, and Alan said that her breed was very rare. They also had a high rank, so it didn't make sense to him that one would hide away for 30 years. Suddenly, it dawned on him that the house still legally belonged to Dorothea, so he asked her to sell it to him to avoid going to court over it. Surprisingly, Dorothea told him that they could continue living there rent-free as long as they helped her with a personal issue. When asked why, she revealed that she was actually a famous author who had gone into hiding to avoid her editor after hitting writer's block. However, now that she'd seen Alan and Charlotte, her creative juices were flowing again, and she needed their help to finish her book. That was how they roped into acting like a low-budget Romeo and Juliet. But instead of dying, Charlotte jumped off the balcony into Alan's arms, and they declared their eternal love for one another. Unfortunately, their director wasn't convinced by their acting and complained that Alan used magic to make Charlotte float rather than hold her in his arms. Alan admitted that he felt embarrassed, so Dorothea asked how he could call himself a real man. She then took the pair into the living room and scolded them for being terrible actors. As she complained, Alan began to regret accepting her proposal, then suddenly announced he was done trying to be the next Henry Cavill. Dorothea and Charlotte were shocked by this, as it meant he was giving up on the house. However, Alan explained that he didn't want to continue torturing Charlotte to flirt with his ugly face. Surprisingly, Charlotte told him she didn't mind, causing Alan to glitch and slam his head into the wall. When Charlotte saw he was bleeding, she began fussing over him, and Gosetsu pointed out they were indirectly flirting. Dorothea agreed and immediately started editing her script. Charlotte soon finished tending to Alan's injury and pleaded with him to give acting another shot. Alan agreed for her sake, but made it clear to Dorothea that he wouldn't do anything that violated society's moral code. Dorothea assured him he had nothing to worry about, then handed him the new script. As soon as Alan read it and discovered that they had to act as newlyweds, he freaked out. Soon, they were back on set, and in the first scene, Alan returned home from a long day at the office. However, Dorothea complained that he wasn't being natural. During the retake, Alan aced his role, and everything was going well until Charlotte, playing his wife, asked if he wanted to take a bath, have dinner, or have her for dinner. His brain overloaded so much that he donated blood to the set, so Dorothea called for a break. Afterwards, she scolded him for ruining the scene, but Alan said she was the one to blame for giving Charlotte inappropriate lines. Having no choice, she agreed to tone the nastiness down and sent them back for the next scene, which was the dinner scene. This also started well until Charlotte called him Al, prompting him to spit out his food and ruin the scene again. Off camera, he confronted Dorothea about the nickname, and she told him it was normal for couples to have nicknames for each other. However, she told him not to worry, as they were moving on to the next setting, a school life situation. Alan complained, but Dorothea ignored him, saying she needed more actors. Gosetsu happily volunteered to take on the role by transforming into his female form, and Lou insisted that Dorothea cast her in it. When they started filming, Alan appeared in a school uniform, looking like a delinquent. His job was to rescue Charlotte, whom Gosetsu and Lou had kidnapped, and Gosetsu told him that he had to fight them to get her back. Alan accepted the challenge, and as they began fighting, Alan seemed to be on the losing side. However, the moment Charlotte's safety was threatened, he powered up and Saitama his opponents. After he freed Charlotte, she thanked him for rescuing her, and Alan suddenly had a flashback of the day he protected her from Megadeth's boys. When he snapped back to his senses, he moved on to the next scene, which was the cliché wall slam thing. As he stared at Charlotte, his heart was acting funny in his chest, but Gosetsu ruined the moment when he called out to him, asking who Charlotte was to him. Alan answered that she was his ward and he her guardian, causing Dorothea to scream, "Cut," as he had gone off script. What he meant to say was that she was a part of his heart, but Alan argued that his version was better. This was because he realized he had feelings for Charlotte. However, he decided not to tell her because he knew she would feel obligated to reciprocate his feelings. Later, Dorothea gathered everyone to tell them what the next scene would be, and even though Alan was tired, he stopped complaining when Charlotte said she was having fun. Shortly after Dorothea handed them the new scripts, they began filming, and Charlotte played a mistreated princess. In the scene, Gosetsu, who played her stepmother, scolded her. After he walked away, she began lamenting the joke that was her life until Lou, acting as a sorcerer, showed up. She gave Charlotte a makeover using magic and then accompanied her to the ball, where she met Alan, who was the prince. He asked her to dance, and as they danced, Charlotte realized her heart was racing. To calm herself, she rested her head on his chest, taking him by surprise. Suddenly, the clock struck 12, and Dorothea called for them to cut the scene. After they changed outfits, she praised Charlotte for portraying her character well, and the magical creatures joined her. However, Alan was overlooked, and it annoyed him because he was sure he'd also done a good job. Soon, it was time for the next scene, which was a continuation of the ball scene, and Alan came to Charlotte's home, looking for her. He had her hairpin with him, and when he showed it to her stepmother, the woman claimed it was hers. Alan didn't believe her and turned his attention to Charlotte, but she pretended not to know him. Alan recognized her by her eye color and asked her to go away with him. Charlotte refused, saying she wasn't worthy to be by his side, but Alan managed to soothe her worries. This made her think about their real-life situation, so she summoned the courage to ask how he truly felt about her. Alan never got to respond because an explosion blew a hole in the wall and a man walked in. He apologized to Alan and Charlotte for the sudden intrusion, then pulled Dorothea out of her hiding place. The mysterious man was her editor, and after securing her tightly with a rope, he commended her for having managed to hide from him for 30 years. Dorothea bragged that it was because she was smart, so he told her that if she used that much brain power in her book, she wouldn't have had to hide. He handed Alan a bag of coins to pay for the wall damage, then left with Dorothea, who kept complaining. Charlotte then tried to get Alan to answer her earlier question, but they were interrupted by Iruka, who came to tell them that Natalia was in serious trouble. Sometime in the past, when Charlotte was still living with her family and being maltreated by everyone, Natalia was the only one who showed her kindness. The girl wanted to spend time with Charlotte, and Charlotte was beyond grateful. Back in the present, Charlotte woke up and realized she'd been dreaming of the past. Not only that, but she was on a ship heading to where Natalia was. Up on the deck, Iruka told Alan that Natalia was the legitimate heir of the Evans family and the only one in the Neru's kingdom who treated Charlotte like a person. While she was still explaining things to him, Charlotte joined them on deck, so they turned their attention to her. Gosetsu and Lou soon joined them, and Iruka became excited because she'd never seen a magical creature before. Soon, the island they were heading for came into view, and Alan commented that it had been 3 years since he last set foot there. The island was home to Alan's alma mater, the Athena Magical Academy, and almost everyone who lived there was associated with the academy in some way. After the group got off the ship, Iruka led them into town and revealed that Natalia was somewhere on the island. They tried to get her to tell them more details, but she said she'd do that after they had all settled in at home. Hearing this, Alan and Charlotte started freaking out for different reasons. Charlotte wasn't ready to meet her potential in-laws, and Alan wasn't prepared to face his dad again. According to Iruka, Alan suddenly quit his job at the academy 3 years ago and left the island after an argument with their father. Alan claimed the fight hadn't been a big deal, but Iruka said it was, as people still talked about it. Apparently, they tried to recreate the Aokiji and Akanu fight, but it lasted only 3 days. The place where they had fought had since been turned into a tourist attraction, and Iruka promised to take Charlotte to see it. As they walked to the Crawfords' home, Gosetsu teased Alan relentlessly until Alan finally revealed that the man he called father was actually his uncle. After his explanation, Charlotte expressed concern that her exile had caused problems for Natalia, but Alan told her not to think that way. When he tried to console her further, Lou and Gosetsu dogpiled him and promised they would do everything they could to help her locate Natalia. Just then, the sound of people fighting drew their attention, and Alan noticed a white-haired guy approach the scene. The guy tried talking to the people involved, but they told him they weren't holding auditions for the Lords of the Ring, so he turned them into popsicles. Charlotte and Gosetsu commented that the guy was impressive, and Iruka excitedly called him over, so he teleported to them. After greeting the siblings, he welcomed Charlotte and introduced himself as Harvey, Alan, and Iruka's father, shocking her. Later, at their home, Harvey mistook Charlotte for Alan's girlfriend, and when Alan tried to correct him, Iruka signaled him not to. Realizing that his sister had planned things that way, he signaled Charlotte to play along too. She then approached Harvey and formally introduced herself as Alan's girlfriend. Harvey asked if she was sure she wanted to remain with his loser son, and Charlotte assured him that she was. She went as far as singing Alan's praises and even told him that he'd been teaching her all kinds of naughty things. Harvey was impressed to know that his son was a master in the sheets, which only made Alan embarrassed. Ignoring his son's outburst, Harvey welcomed Charlotte into his home and said he'd help with their wedding plans, which shocked them. Realizing that marriage wasn't in their plans, Harvey assumed they were dating casually and asked Alan to consider moving back home. Alan refused, saying he liked his life the way it was and wasn't going to change it for anything. It was then that Aruka revealed that Harvey wanted Alan to take his place as the Academy's chair. Not surprisingly, Alan said he didn't want the position, and as he tried to explain why, a lady walked into the room. Charlotte assumed she was Alan's other sibling, but she was shocked when Lizelot introduced herself as his mother. Alan then revealed that Harvey wanted him to take over his position so that he could begin a second honeymoon phase with his mother. Harvey didn't even try to deny it and said he was looking forward to putting more buns in her oven. Tired of listening to his father's cringy ramblings, Alan asked him about Natalia. Harvey said she was currently enrolled at the academy and had been there for almost 3 months. According to what they heard, the family was facing problems, so they sent Natalia away, claiming she was studying abroad to keep her safe. When Alan asked why they hadn't informed him sooner, Harvey explained that Natalia had enrolled under a fake name. However, even after they learned her true identity, they still couldn't tell Alan because of the factional rivalry at the school. Alan asked what that had to do with Natalia, so Harvey said it was better to see things for themselves. He instructed Aruka to uncover a magic equipment known as the Mirror of Nostalgia, which allowed one to see another location. In the mirror, they watched as Natalia, sitting alone by the fountain, was surrounded by other students. Charlotte and Alan immediately grew worried that they were about to be bullied, but they were shocked when Charlotte smacked one of the students. She then scolded the others for mixing up her order, so they fearfully apologized to her. Harvey explained that Natalia was at the top of the Academy's factions and was feared by almost all the students. This plot twist wasn't what they had been expecting, and Charlotte grew worried that her sister had gone astray. Harvey asked her to look at the mirror again, and Charlotte caught a glimpse of the kind sister she knew. When the clip stopped rolling, Harvey told Alan that he wanted him to discipline Natalia a little because some of her antics had gone too far. Alan agreed to take on the role of disciplinarian and told Charlotte that he would help her meet Natalia by hiding her identity. He asked Harvey to forge an identification card for Charlotte, and Harvey assured him it would be ready by morning. He then tried to leave with Charlotte, but Lizelot insisted that they stay with them and took the room she had prepared. When they saw that it had a single bed, they panicked, which made Lizelot suspect that they were lying about their relationship. Alan quickly assured his mother that they were truly a couple, so the woman left. Once they were alone, Charlotte suggested they go to bed because the next day would be hectic. A little while after they got into bed, Alan apologized to Charlotte for involving her in the lie that had led them to share a bed. Charlotte told him not to worry about it and pointed out that it was the first time they had shared a bed since the hot spring trip. She then looked at him strangely, so Alan tried to knock himself out with a spell, but it didn't work. Eventually, he realized that the bed had been imbued with magic disabling properties, and he knew the one responsible was Aruka. As they lay there, Charlotte engaged him in small talk about his parents' relationship. According to her, they were relationship goals, and Alan couldn't help but imagine what things between him and Charlotte would be like if they started dating. This prompted him to ask if he should follow his father's footsteps and act like a simp for the remainder of their stay there. Charlotte grew flustered upon hearing what he said, so Alan apologized and assured her they didn't have to go that far with the pretend. Charlotte then asked him to tell her what he'd been trying to tell her that day when Dorothea's editor had interrupted, and Alan got nervous. He began to wonder whether he should be honest with her, while Charlotte wondered whether she was prepared to hear the truth. The two continued their separate inner monologues for a while, and after doing a few flashbacks, they made up their minds. Alan wanted to open up, but Charlotte had chickened out and apologized for bringing it up. She then tucked herself in and turned her back to him after saying goodnight. This outcome left Aruka, listening through the wall in hopes of hearing Charlotte's singing, disappointed. In the morning, Alan changed Charlotte's appearance with magic, then they left for the academy. Upon their arrival, they went straight to the fountain to look for Natalia, and she immediately assumed a defensive stance. Alan noticed how she casually surveyed her surroundings and became impressed by her alertness. Natalia then asked who he was, and Alan told her that he was a temporary substitute teacher. However, the other students recognized his name and cowered in fear, as they were familiar with the tales of Alan's escapades at the academy. Unfazed, Natalia asked who Charlotte was, and Alan introduced her as his assistant, Charlo. After the introduction, Natalia asked what business Alan had with her, and he revealed that he had been tasked with disciplining troubled folks like her. When he extended his hand to her, saying she could think of him as her private tutor, Natalia told him she didn't need one. After she walked away with her gang, Alan noticed Charlotte shaking with excitement because she finally got to speak with her sister after a long time. Alan assured her she would have more chances to talk to Natalia, and in no time, they would be besties again. Just thinking about it made Charlotte burst into tears, and Alan didn't know what to do, as everyone gave him weird looks, as if he were the one who had made her cry. Later, Alan and Charlotte joined Natalia's class and were impressed when she drew the teacher's attention to the mistake he had made. Charlotte admitted that she herself didn't understand the equation, prompting Natalia to question how she became Alan's assistant. Alan covered up, saying Charlotte was new to learning magic, and suggested that Natalia give her a few lessons to help her catch up faster. Natalia protested, telling Alan not to pass his job on to her, but Charlotte managed to persuade her to explain things as the lesson progressed. After class, Charlotte thanked Natalia, who curiously asked why she wanted to study magic. Charlotte said it was so she could get stronger and protect those around her for a change, since she was the one always getting protected by them. She promised Natalia she would do her best to master the spell she had taught her, and Natalia told her not to push herself, as the spell was difficult. The next moment, Lou and Gosetsu arrived with Charlotte and Alan's lunch, and everyone stared in awe as Charlotte interacted with them. Natalia had to ask Charlotte who she really was because no normal person could be all chummy with magical creatures. So while they ate lunch, Charlotte revealed that she was a beast tamer, which Natalia found impressive. As she began eating, Charlotte told her she needed to eat some veggies and left to get her some. While she was away, Natalia wondered why Charlotte cared what she ate, and Alan said it was because Charlotte had a sister her age. After accepting his explanation, Natalia asked Alan whether her family had sent him, and he said no, which made her feel relieved. She admitted that she disliked her family because they were selfish, rich snobs, and said she was studying magic so she could be independent. Alan told her he understood she'd been through a lot, especially with what had happened to her sister. Immediately, Natalia's demeanor changed, and she told him never to bring the subject up again. She then tried to leave, but a boy named Chris, who seemed to have dubbed her his rival, blocked her path. After a verbal showdown, he walked away with his gang, but two of the guys bumped into Charlotte, causing her to drop the tray she was carrying. When they began speaking to her rudely, Natalia charged at them and kicked them to the floor. She then began lecturing Chris about teaching his people proper manners, but Alan stepped in to calm her down. Natalia became even more pissed and accused him of not caring for Charlotte. However, Alan told her not to mistake his intervention for peace, and the next moment, he activated his domain expansion. Unfamiliar with the art, Chris's group became scared and tried to attack him, so Alan schooled them properly. When he was about to unleash his final attack, Charlotte dispelled it with lightning magic, after which she scolded him and Natalia for causing trouble. She also made the two kneel before her long after the incident, and when she finished lecturing them on why fighting was wrong, she went to play with Lou and Gosetsu. As Alan and Natalia watched her, Alan couldn't help but be proud of how well she handled the situation. He turned to Natalia and told her he knew she was only pretending to be a bad guy. Natalia didn't deny it and said that people like Chris made her contemplate murder more than a few times in a day. She then asked whether he would ask her to make peace with him, and Alan surprised her by saying no. He told her she ought to conquer the academy and become its ruler, shocking her into silence. Days later, Eruka ran into the classroom where Alan, Charlotte, and Natalia were holed up. After exchanging pleasantries and introducing herself to Natalia, she asked what they were all up to. Natalia said Alan was giving her a crash course in taking over the academy, and Eruka was shocked. However, Alan was so proud of himself that he began bragging about what he'd already taught Natalia, and said the only thing left was to defeat Chris in a duel. The excited Natalia swore she would be victorious, so Alan offered to teach her a secret technique, and she said she was ready to learn. As the two laughed manically, Eruka reminded Alan that he was supposed to be guiding Natalia back to the right path. At the same time, Charlotte was busy freaking out that her sister had become the spawn of the devil. That evening, after Natalia claimed flawless victory over Chris, the boy angrily stormed off with his gang. Alan praised Natalia, and after she thanked him, she pointed to a sealed-off dungeon, asking why they weren't allowed to go in there. Yurka explained that it was because the dungeon boss was in her laying season. Just then, Natalia's boys came running and proudly recounted how they had put some students who crossed them in their place. Natalia praised them for a job well done, and they began to cry tears of joy, attributing their success to Gosetsu's training. Natalia was excited to see Gosetsu standing there with Lou, so she thanked him for training her underlings while she trained with Alan. Gosetsu told her not to thank him and then ordered the boys to run a lap around the island after cracking his whip. After the boys ran off, he and Lou followed suit. So Alan asked Natalia why she never called him Professor, as she did Gosetsu. Natalia said it was because he was the great demon lord and then told him not to get too cocky. At that moment, her stomach growled, so Charlotte took her to the cafeteria to get some food. Natalia didn't like that she'd gotten her a salad, but Charlotte encouraged her to eat it, saying it was good for her health. At another table, Eruka spoke about the siblings and asked whether Alan had tried to talk to Natalia about Charlotte. Alan told her that the girl didn't want to talk about her sister, but said he wouldn't stop trying to get her to open up. Back at Natalia and Charlotte's table, the former nervously told Charlotte that she wanted to teach her a new spell. Charlotte was pleased to hear this, but reminded her that she still had training with Alan. Natalia assured her it wasn't something she couldn't handle, and Charlotte agreed. Natalia said they would begin the following day. Just then, Natalia's minions showed up, covered in sweat and still panting from their lap around the island, and they asked Natalia if she could include them in the training. Before she could respond, Gosetsu showed up and said they weren't ready to advance to the master class, then whipped the floor and told them to keep running. Later that night, Alan carried a sleeping Natalia to her room and the whole gang tagged along. When they walked in, they were surprised to find books and papers everywhere, which meant she was dedicated to her studies. After laying her on her bed, Alan noticed a sealed box by her pillow, and one of her minions told him that Natalia never allowed anyone to touch the bag. Curious, Alan scanned it with magic and discovered that, aside from being magically sealed, it was also biometrically locked and set to trigger a trap if forced open. Just then, Chris showed up, so Alan asked if he was there to drop off a challenge letter for Natalia, which made him run off in embarrassment. Long after Natalia's goons left, Alan, Charlotte, Lou, and Gosetsu sat watching Natalia sleep, and Charlotte told them that since she reunited with her sister, the girl had never once spoken about her family. She felt it was because Natalia hated her, and that it would be best if she forgot about her. Alan and the others told her not to jump to conclusions before learning Natalia's reasons, and they comforted her, saying they were sure Natalia still loved her. Alan also promised not to give up until her relationship with Natalia was back to what it had been. The next morning, Charlotte snuck out of the room she shared with Alan and went to meet Natalia for spell training. Charlotte easily mastered the spells Natalia taught her, and afterwards, she thanked her. Natalia accepted her thanks and then invited Charlotte to her room, saying she had something to show her. However, when they arrived, Natalia discovered her bag was missing. As she searched the room, she found a letter from Chris, challenging her to a duel with the bag as the prize. Natalia asked Charlotte not to tell Alan about the challenge and rushed off before Charlotte could stop her. Later, Natalia's minions went to find Alan and told him that Natalia was nowhere to be seen. As they were trying to figure out where she might have gone, one of Chris's minions came running and told them that Chris had summoned Natalia into the forbidden dungeon for a duel. Alan immediately remembered what Iruka had said about the dungeon boss and realized that they were in serious trouble. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, Chris taunted Natalia with her bag and then threw it down into a hole. He told Natalia that whoever retrieved the bag first would be the winner and then rushed ahead of her. Back in the garden, his underling told Alan that Chris hated Natalia because, after she transferred to the academy, she took his spot as the top student. Ever since then, he'd been trying to best her, but always failed. The night before, he overheard them talking about the bag and decided to use it to his advantage. Alan then ordered everyone to stay put while he went to the dungeon, but he asked Gosetsu to send word to his father if things got out of hand. Back in the dungeon, Natalia held her bag tightly after having found it first, but neither of them could leave because a chimera had shown up. They did their best to fight it off, but it was stronger, and just as it was about to stomp on Natalia, Charlotte arrived and hit it with a spell. After it ran off, both girls huddled next to Chris, waiting for him to regain consciousness. Natalia then began scolding Charlotte for risking her life for them. Charlotte said it was because she couldn't bear the thought of Natalia getting hurt, so Natalia asked why she cared about her. Charlotte thought about revealing the truth to her, but decided against it at the last minute. Meanwhile, Alan just arrived at the dungeon, but as he ran in deeper, he kept praying that the dungeon boss wouldn't wake up. Back where Charlotte, Natalia, and the unconscious Chris were, Natalia hugged her bag to herself and revealed to Charlotte that she had an older sister. Charlotte told her that she'd read in the paper that Natalia's sister had committed a crime, but Natalia angrily cut her off. She said it was all a lie the prince had cooked up, and that instead of helping her, their family had cut her off. She blamed herself for failing to help Charlotte as well, and as tears streamed down her face, she recounted their past together. She said Charlotte had always loved her since birth, but because she was so young, she couldn't protect her from their family. When the thing with the prince happened, Charlotte's belongings were thrown away, but she managed to retrieve the bag and has kept it with her ever since. Charlotte was surprised to hear this, and even more so when Natalia said that she'd placed a location spell on the bag to track her sister down. However, whenever she activated it, there was always an interference, and she suspected that it was the doing of the person holding her sister captive. Natalia swore that if she ever found the person, it would be on sight, and Charlotte grew worried for Alan's safety since she knew he was the one jamming the spell. She then assured Natalia that she would see her sister again, and Natalia thanked her for her kind words. She told Charlotte that even though they had only just met, she felt as though she'd known her whole life. Charlotte tried to explain why, but Chris suddenly started crying, cutting her off. It turned out that he had overheard Natalia's story and was feeling sorry for her, so he apologized for how he treated her. Just as Natalia told him to get up and wipe his snot, the place began to shake, and the dungeon boss showed up. It was a fire-breathing salamander, and it had come prepared to cook them. Charlotte immediately got between the monster and the younglings, telling them to run while she distracted it. Natalia didn't want to go, and even when Chris tried to drag her away, she stood her ground, so Charlotte firmly told her to go, leaving no room for argument. Just then, the salamander attacked Charlotte with its fire breath, but Charlotte countered it with a spell of her own. After that, she tried to lure the creature away, but was blasted by its next attack and fell unconscious. The blast also revealed her true form, and when Natalia saw that it was her sister, her worry doubled. Fortunately, Alan arrived just in time to protect Charlotte from another blast before angrily flexing his power. The entire island trembled at this, and even the salamander backed down. But to Natalia and Chris's surprise, it started playing with Alan. Just then, Lizelot arrived and told the younger ones that students weren't allowed in the dungeon. They ignored what she was saying and pointed towards the salamander, saying it was acting strangely. Lizelot casually revealed that Alan had raised the salamander, and now that it had recognized him, it was happy to see him. Later, as they stood outside the dungeon, Chris apologized to Harvey for breaking the ruler and said he was ready to receive any punishment he was given. While he did that, Natalia approached Alan, and he woke Charlotte, allowing the sisters to reunite at last. Charlotte apologized for deceiving her, but Natalia didn't mind and said she'd been hoping for a day that Charlotte would read her favorite book again. Charlotte told her the book had been lost, but Natalia pulled it out of the bag, and the two hugged each other tightly. After that tearful reunion, they all went to the garden, and Natalia thanked Alan for saving her sister. Charlotte began singing Alan's praises, but stopped before she could define what her relationship was with him. When Natalia tried to get her to say it, Lou and Gositsu walked up to them and told Natalia that Alan and Charlotte were dating. Charlotte immediately denied it, but Natalia wasn't in the mood to listen. She activated a spell and began chasing Alan around, saying she would fry his sausage for taking advantage of her sister. As Charlotte tried to stop her, Alan's family watched them, and his parents expressed disappointment that the relationship had been a lie. Aruka apologized for starting the lie, but assured them that the love between Alan and Charlotte was real. Days later, Charlotte and Alan were back home, and as they sat drinking tea, they each wondered if it was a good time to talk about their feelings. Just as they decided to put it off again, Miaksha showed up with a package for them. After she left, Charlotte looked at the box and called Alan's attention to it, saying it didn't have a sender's address. Curious, they opened it and saw a piece of paper with a magic circle drawn on it. Alan activated it without thinking, and the next moment, a summoning portal opened above their head. To their surprise, Natalia was the one who emerged from it, and she used Alan as a landing strip. Just then, Miacha and Aruka arrived and revealed they had planned the surprise after Natalia said she wanted to visit Charlotte. When Natalia didn't see Alan, she asked where he was, and he responded that he was currently her footmat. Natalia tried to attack him again, but Charlotte stopped her. As Charlotte tried to talk Natalia out of it, Dorothea barged in. Miacha and Aruka were surprised to see her, and Natalia asked Charlotte how she knew the writer. Charlotte revealed she had once lived in the house. Dorothea had come to give them a copy of her new book, and said she was working on a sequel, hoping they would help her with it. She also said that she hadn't gotten any new ideas and needed a place to hide from her editor in the meantime. Alan didn't want her to stay, but Miacha and Arua guilt-tripped him into agreeing. They also got him to agree to a sleepover, even though he wanted them all out of his house. After dinner, they all went to bed, and Charlotte dreamed that she was back in her family's dark basement. As she was about to lose all hope, Alan suddenly showed up and took her away with him. At that moment, she woke up and decided to search for Alan. When she found him, he invited her to do the naughtiest thing a person could do at night. This activity turned out to be drinking hot chocolate and stargazing, and, surprisingly, Charlotte was very knowledgeable about the stars. As she pointed out which was which, she and Alan accidentally touched hands, leading to an indirect confession session. When they leaned in to kiss, Alan suddenly demanded that everyone show themselves as he'd sensed them lurking in the shadows. The gang did as they were told, but Natalia complained that Alan had tried to corrupt her innocent sister, and she began attacking him. The others soon joined her, so Alan decided to go on the offensive and told them to come at him if they dared. The next day, in the Neru's kingdom, Cecil was informed of Charlotte's whereabouts, so he ordered that she be captured and brought before him. What do you think Cecil's true motives are for framing Charlotte, and would Alan ever get to clap Charlotte? That's it for today's video. If you got this far, comment coconut. Also, check out this next video.